Hello, my name is Parrish. I'm the Crop Sciences Research and Education Center Director. Today I'll be covering our variety testing program and tell you how to interpret and use the data for your farm operations. A little bit about our program history. It started in 1934. It is currently being managed by Darren Jose. Our program is a little bit unique than some other states in that it's industry supported. So this means that the industries pay a fee to enter varieties and hybrids into the program, and then we test them for them. Currently, we are testing corn, soybeans, wheat, and hemp. In the past, we've also tested some alfalfa as well. Here's a map of each of the crops and their locations. So for corn, we have these different 12 locations that are scattered throughout the state. They're broken up into regional tests. So we have a northern, an eastern and western region, and a southern region. Soybeans is a little bit different. We have 5 regions broken up on a north to south gradient. And then we have wheat, which is just a northern and southern location with 3 spots within each test. Our planting equipment, so the equipment is all GPSed and automated, which makes for really great uniform row spacings. And so we have this Almaco planter that has vacuum and electric drives, and then we have this cone planter that we use for our wheat and hemp trials. Harvest, we have 2 different types of Almaco combines. So we have these 40s and then this 20. So with the corn and soybean trials, we just harvest the inner 2 rows, which allows for us to avoid the competition from the outer 2 rows. And then with the wheat and hemp, we harvest the entire plot, but we cut alleyways in there. Next, let's go over interpreting the data. So at the front of the booklet, there's a section on there on how to use the information. So by all means, check that out, but we can go run through a little exercise real quick here. So there'll be a chart of information here with all the data, and the bold section is the regional average. And so that's one way of looking at the data if you don't have one of these trials right on top of you or are looking for particular management sections to cover later. So one thing to look at is, of course, the average for the trial, then of course the LSD, which is used to compare the hybrids and varieties, and then the CV. So the CV just kind of tells you how well the trial uniformity is. So a number like 5 tells you that's a pretty reliable location. You start getting numbers above 10, there might have been some weather damage or some other kind of issue there, which we plant reps, which allows us to kind of tease out some of that information, or remove a plot that just had a weird situation and was destroyed or damaged too poorly from say a sprayer ran over a row and did some damage or something like that. We can remove that information but still get you some good statistical information. So let's just run through a little exercise here just to help you guys understand how to use the data. So in the average section, the LSD is 8. So if you take the Prairie 4470 and subtract it from the yield from the 8405, there's a 4 bushel difference, so it's not significantly different due to the LSD. But if we take that same Viking 8405 compared to the Viking 4602, there's an 18 bushel difference, so it is statistically different. Now if we move over to the right, the average, the individual trial, there's an LSD of 11. So if you take the same Prairie hybrid compared to the Viking hybrid, there's a 13 bushel difference here. So it is statistically different. And if you take that same 8405 compared to the Viking 4602, there's a 5 bushel difference at that location. So it's not statistically different. So this information, obviously, if you have a trial really close to your farm, or if you are just trying to find some more broad spectrum stuff, just be cautious of how you use the data. You can't really take one hybrid from one location compared to another hybrid at another location. That just isn't going to be reliable for you or sound way of doing the comparison. And of course, you always want to check your RMs and moisture percents for what you're trying to plant, and then those regions and ranges that you're looking for, just so you're comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges. Now let's look at our individual trials and go over a little bit about them. So our corn plots are planted on 4 rows on 23-foot lengths, with there's an alley in there to break up each individual plot. We plant at 36,500 seeds per acre, and then we have early and late RM trials. We correct our moistures to 15.5% and then provide lodging information in there. And so again, with those 4 rows, we only harvest the middle 2 to get our data. So here's what the charts all look like once we get done making them out. We sort by company, and then variety or hybrid name, and then we have a bunch of information on seed treatments and genetics and herbicide tolerance. Again, we have the RMs in there, and then the bolded section is the regional result information, and then the trial locations next to that. So one thing that I really like about our data too is we have these 2 and 3 year averages, which really allows you to see how consistent some of those hybrids and varieties are across time. And so you can kind of compare years and how they're comparing one from the other. But then at the bottom of the page, if you're not quite sure what the acronyms mean, we have some information on there on what the seed treatments are, what those traits mean, and the herbicide tolerances. But then sometimes you might come across this O value in there, which means just other. There's obviously as technology improves and changes some of the packages that are in there. Just always go back to the company labels and websites and product guides to understand what the tolerances are. And again, some of the programs and companies only enter one version of a hybrid, so they might have a Smart Stacks and a Double Pro, but they only put one of those into our trials. So obviously look at that information depending on what you're looking to plant. And then you also might see some information too at the bottom of the page. So like I mentioned, there's 3 locations within each region that get pulled together for the regional data. And so like at Freeport, we had a sprayer mishap, and a GMO herbicide was sprayed on this plot, which has non-GMO corn in it, and so it wouldn't have been fair to bring that information into the data for you. A little bit on our trial management. So we are working with farmer cooperators, and every farmer manages differently, and so if you're a farmer who really does some different management rather than just kind of a pre-plant and spraying and post applications, doing a little bit different. You can see it within this trial location. We have one farmer who side dresses, and then we have another farmer who uses strip tillage. And so maybe you want to look at that data just with a little bit more critical eye, and maybe pull in some of the other locations if there's hybrids and varieties, and kind of do some of your own pooling data based off of management. And again, all our data is on our website in an Excel form, so you can pull that and do some of that. But again, I caution you from comparing hybrids and varieties across locations, but if you pull each location together to get averages, that would be okay. Our soybean trials, again, planted on 4 rows, a little bit shorter rows. They're 21 feet long. Our population is 166,000. We break these trials into early and late RM groups. We correct our moisture to 13%, provide our lodging information there. And then on the website, usually later in the year, we get our protein and oil content information. But we try to get the yield data up as soon as possible. I know many of you are making decisions while you're harvesting and trying to look at that data. So we try to get up as fast as we can, but the oil and protein content happens a little bit later in the year. So you can kind of maybe check out how that pans out for the particular varieties that you've selected later in the year. And again, in our booklets, we have a lot of information. And so a lot of the phenotypic and genetic information we have listed in different tables. And so like here's the soybean information in there. You have your soybean cyst nematode resistance, Photophytophthora, root rot resistance ratings in there. Are a little bit more on the seed treatments and colors and that type of a thing, and herbicide tolerances. So be sure to go back to those booklets, and of course, once you've kind of narrowed some of that stuff down, you can always verify that stuff with the company products and labels. So going into what the soybean tables look like, again, we organize them by the trial. So we have the early ones, then it's just company name, and then their variety name, get the herbicide tolerance in there. Again, Darren goes through and rates the plots, so we can see the maturity date in there, so you can always kind of compare that with how the company rates it, then height data in there, lodging information, each individual trial location, and then our 2 and 3 year data along with the regional protein and oil data, which is provided by the funding for that information is provided by the Illinois Soybean Association. So again, a lot of the information in here might be a little bit different than from trial to trial, but a lot of the same things are consistent. The regional information, the averages, the LSDs, and the CV data at the bottom. So as you're going through and picking things, that might be important to look at. One unique thing about our variety testing program with our soybean groups is we have some of these legacy varieties in there. So we have Dwight Williams 82 and a few others just based off of maturity, which is kind of really neat to see how genetics are improving within the industry, and you can kind of compare some of that consistency. If you're someone who's really interested in seeing how those varieties are performing over time, by all means pull the Excel data sheets off our website and dig into that data, and maybe there's something unique you can see and find out, and we'd be happy to hear how that information is going. But it really allows us to kind of see how genetics are improving, and you can see with this year's data, over almost 20 bushels more than some of those. So it's kind of neat to see how that plays out. Onto our trial management. Obviously soybeans can be a little bit finicky in the fall, and so and especially with our a wide range of maturities within soybeans, you might see some shattering, and so trying to get everything harvested in a timely manner is pretty important. What we try to do, Darren's on the phone with our cooperators trying to find out where he can go, but weather doesn't always allow for a timely harvest. So you can see at this regional data for our region 3 data that we have about 3 weeks difference in our harvest date. So if for some reason one particular variety doesn't look great there because it's super early or super late, you might want to just kind of look at that information and see what might be going on. Whereas our region 4 data, there's 3 days between the harvest times in there, which should allow for the information to be fairly consistent with comparing things. But again, obviously, one problem with variety trials is you're trying to get everything harvested at one location at one time. So things usually on the fringe may not always look the best. So if you're looking for something early, you might want to provide a little grace to those, or something super late, just because it might not always be harvested at the optimum time. We'll see that again with our hemp trials. Going into our wheat trials, we plant these with that drill on 7.5 inch row spacing, so they end up being 45 inches wide. We plant 20 feet, but then cut an alleyway, so we only harvest 16 feet of the plot. And then our populations are at almost 1.5 million seeds per acre, and then we correct the moistures to 13.5% and provide that lodging information. Again, with our wheat information, we have a lot more data scattered throughout the book, especially some of that phenotypic and genetic information that might be critical to you. Since obviously wheat moistures can kind of change and fluctuate, putting in some of that early maturity information in there, later maturity stuff for your management information can be useful for you, along with winter hardiness and plant height and all those different types of things. So once you've kind of narrowed down maybe some of the hybrids you want, you might want to flip back to some of these other pages to see how they might work for your operations based off of their genetic capabilities. Again, just looking at our harvest data, we provide, again, company name by variety, and then seed treatments in there, what's going on, and then just rank yields, since obviously soybean or wheat can fluctuate moistures. We do rank these by yield rank these, so that's just unique with this trial location. Provide that test weight, lodging information, and again that the 2 and 3 year data, which does show that consistency over time. One unique thing on campus we have is a field that consistently has scab in it, and so a lot of our wheat varieties pass through this trial, and Dr. Jessica Rakowski is our small grains breeder. Her, along with our pathology group and Darren, take these ratings and try to get this information out to you for better management, decision-making reasons. And so this is kind of a really unique tool that we have, especially for our state. So if there's a situation where scab is a problem for you, check out this page for more information. Again, we have our trial management information in there, so we always try to get our wheat planted by the first week of October. You can see when fertilizer is applied in the fall and spring, and then we try to harvest late June, first half of July too. So pretty consistent with everybody else. Next, I want to cover our hemp trials. I know hemp isn't a big crop in the state right now, but in order for us to help make that possible or feasible, we wanted to provide some grain and fiber information to our growers. There's a lot of genetics currently out on the market, but obviously none of that is really geared for the Midwest just yet. A lot of the genetics are coming out of Europe or Canada or Asia, and so when you start moving things around, they don't always perform like they are intended to, just because of the weather, geographic location, photo period that we have in our state. And so getting you some good information on hemp to move forward with, I thought was pretty important. And so for our grain and fiber trials, we use that same drill on 7.5 inch row spacings. We planted the 20 feet, but for the grain, this past year we cut down to 16 feet, cut an alleyway in there because that reel can cause some seed loss when it hits the other plot in front of it. The fiber plot, we harvest the whole 19 feet, have a nice little foot alleyway, so we don't have a big gap in there. And then you can see we did a seeding rate as well, and so our population for the grain was 650,000 seeds per acre, and then a little over 1 million for the second seeding rate. And then for fiber, we did 1 million and then 1.5 million seeds, Pure Life seeds, which is also important seed quality. And then we corrected our moisture for the grain to 9%, and then for fiber 0%. So here's a little bit what the hemp plot looks like towards the end of the year. A lot of these are already done flowering, but you can see that one in the back that's really green, that one has yet to flower. And so the genetic diversity that's out on the market can vary a lot, and if you're looking at grain or fiber, you're going to be looking for different components. And so we have a bunch of data on hemp trials, especially on flowering dates, plant heights, to help you make good decisions for what crop you select. We did not do any redding for the fiber trials either, so we just strictly used this chopper, chopped it up, weighed it, and then grabbed a sample for the moisture content. For our grain plots, we use this plot combine to harvest and collect our seeds. And so you can use standard equipment out there for harvesting hemp, but hemp has really strong fibers, so all the rotating pieces you got to be careful and keep your eye on, because the hemp can bind around that stuff, so you'll want to check that from time to time. But the seed quality that you get out of using a combine works just fine, and I'll cover a little bit more in the next little section on that. So a little bit on our trial data here, especially for our grain and trial. There's a few plots here that you were missing information. Again, this is where some of that genetic diversity that we had in the trial was just way too wide, and so rather than put bad data into the trial, we just left it out, because you may find a use for some of these really early varieties for a double cropping system, or some other unique opportunity that you have for your system. But one thing that we did notice, especially within the seeding rate section there, so you can see our plants per square foot. and then the yields across from them. So what was really interesting is even though we had different seeding rates, the yields within a particular variety weren't statistically different from each other. So in a grain operation, you may be able to cut your seeding rate down because hemp will branch out and kind of fill in those rows, kind of like soybean does, and still maintain that yield. Now, it might be interesting how some of those interactions play out, especially with earlier planting dates that we might have. When we look at our biomass trials, again, we ran into some of the same information on the different seeding rates. So even though the seeding rates were different, our tonnage weren't statistically different from each other. And so you might be able to cut back on your seed costs, but for fiber, one thing to note is that quality might change. If you cut back on your seeding rate, you're going to get bigger stalked plants, which is going to have more of the herd material. But if you pack in a bunch of seeds in there and get a bunch of little plants, skinny plants in there, that's going to have more of the industrial fiber material. So depending on your end use and your buyer, you may want to still adjust that seeding rate based off the quality aspects for fiber. And going back to some quality things for grain, even though the combine can harvest and clean the seed pretty well and does a really nice job, you still end up with some trash in there because you end up harvesting the seed ideally around 18-20% moisture. And so that's going to have some trash, some green material in there. So it's going to be really important to get some air on the seed as soon as possible, and to kind of move that seed around within the bin or whatever you might do, so you don't get some of those hot spots where mold might come in. And so that's going to be one of the probably the biggest hang-ups with the hemp grain side is just that quality, because you can get everything right in season, just like we did. But then at the end of the season, you go and harvest it, and then you mismanage that harvesting time handling, and ruin a bunch of the seeds, because it is a high oil seed. So it's going to be like soybeans. You can't put heat on it. You might crack the seeds and damage it. So just do a little bit more information and try to talk to any of your grain guys or people within the hemp grain industry to find out how to get that done right. And so I know today I covered our variety testing website and data in there, but of course there's a ton of people doing research on campus. And so, Dr. Belo's lab does a lot of management type work, so you can check out his website online, Crop Sciences webpage. Of course, our extension folks have a lot of information that they're pulling from not just our university, but from other universities as well. We also have the farm docs, which is more economic information, but during the season, our faculty are getting different kind of bulletins out on different situations that are current for the time. You can see some articles in there from Dr. Emerson Efsinger on fertilizer management, or Dr. Sider on some of the entomology work that he does. And so you can always visit that site or subscribe to it and get that information when it comes out. Of course, we have our YouTube channel. There's a lot of great videos on there from past agronomy days, or just kind of recap videos I've pulled together. So you can always visit that and watch those on your leisure. And so we try to get that information out to you as best in many different formats. Of course, then there's always the ACES news, where this is more a general within the whole College of ACES. So different funding projects that have gotten started, things going on with students, just kind of a great way to stay in touch of what's going on campus and what activities we're working on. As I mentioned, we have our Agronomy Day program. I pulled a lot of the individual research programs into this portal here on this page. So if you want to look at the different programs, you can go to the Agronomy Day website and look at that information. So just to summarize our today's talk with you, our variety testing page and info data can be a useful guide for making decisions. Obviously, we may not be planting the same populations you are, same row spacings you are, but hopefully it's a tool that can help tease out some information, especially if you're looking at not just our sources, but even some of the other third-party sources and industry sources. And something's consistently in the top, that might be a good variety to choose, or if it's always consistently bottom, maybe stay away from. So, and that type of thing. Of course, digging in the data a little bit more can aid your decision-making process, especially if you manage a little bit more unique and that type of thing. Of course, I encourage you to talk to your seed reps to get their products into our testing program. Obviously, they have budgets and can't put everything in there, but say, as we see something like tar spot in there, and something I've noticed is just planting a little bit earlier RM, so you can kind of avoid some of the late effects that tar spot can bring to a crop. So maybe they start entering some earlier maturity groups into the trials, and really give a wider spectrum of how their products perform. Maybe slightly out of zone, but can be useful for growers in those zones in case of even replant or something like that. And of course, if there's any things that we need to start looking at a change in our program, please pass along to our extension folks, and I'll have Darren's contact information on the next slide. Pass along, because if we hear a management thing or a trial that needs done, we'll try to figure it out, possibly if we can do it, or just if we hear enough people asking for it. We really want our trials to be useful to our stakeholders and our growers in the state. And so we're just trying to make these trials as useful and relevant as we can. And so feedback from you is great. And so here's that email for Darren. If you have any comments or questions about the trials, he's great. He's been managing the trials for a really long time, and really wouldn't be possible without his time and energy and devotion to the program. Thank you.